Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Playing Smart, Implementing Your Gamification Strategy. My name is Melissa, and I will be kicking things off for us today. Let's get started with some brief introductions. Our presenters today are David Wentworth, who is the Principal Learning Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group, and Isobel Wallace, who is the General Manager at Thinking Cap. Isobel has been with Thinking Cap since its inception in 2001 as general manager. Specializing in process and user experience, Isobel works with customers to onboard their training programs into the LMS. Her valuable insights in the delivery of unique and engaging training programs for associations like NCPA, corporations like Amazon, and nonprofit organizations like the British Council. Speak to Isobel about how to achieve 100% completion rates on your training. I would like to extend a thank you to Thinking Cap for sponsoring today's webinar. Thinking Cap is their logo and their ethos. There is science, magic, and just a bit of whimsy in their Thinking Cap, in us, and in their clients. Since they started in 2001, they have delivered superior learning management solutions to corporate, higher education, and not-for-profit clients on 4 continents. The results is that they have helped hundreds of thousands of learners expand their knowledge, skills, and expertise. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we are a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. A quick mention that we currently have several certification programs open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. You can visit certification.brandonhall.com for more information on all programs. Your participation in our surveys is one of the most crucial components of our research. So if you have a few minutes to spare and see any topics on our list that you would like to take a survey for, it's always greatly appreciated. Links will be available in your handout, or you can always visit brandonhall.com and click on Open Surveys for the latest list. All participants do receive a piece of complimentary research once the results have been analyzed. And last, but certainly not least, a few logistics. To ask questions, we ask that you please use the questions panel on your control bar. Today's presentation is being recorded. We will share a link to the recording and a PDF of today's presentation via email in roughly 24 hours. The chat is also open for today, so we invite you to join in on today's discussion with our presenters. Share your thoughts as we go. Or if you have a minute right now, just pop in, say hello, and let us know where you're joining in from today. If you would like to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, the link to do so will be available in the chat momentarily. And without any further delay, I'm going to turn things over to Dave so we can dive right in.
Great, thanks so much, Melissa. And as mentioned, we're going to talk a bit about gamification today and some of the things that are involved, some considerations and challenges and things to think about, and why it's so important that we start talking about games and gamification and the role they play in the learning experience. So we're happy to have Isobel with us today to help us walk through this, and we really look forward to any questions that you might have, so please feel free to use the question box or the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on those to communicate with you today, and yeah, just really looking forward to that. So we're going to just jump right in. I wanted to start off by sharing some of the recent data we've collected around where organizations are with this idea of gamification in their learning. Every year we do a human capital management outlook study where we get a pulse for what organizations are thinking about for the upcoming year. And for this year, for the one that we did for 2022, we asked if companies were thinking about investing in gamification or not. And the majority of organizations do plan on investing somewhat in gamification for learning. Although only 8% say it's going to be a very heavy investment, still overall 62% of companies are going to plan to make some sort of investment in gamification. Another thing we wanted to look at too was whether or not the pandemic had an effect on the use of gamification, because we know it definitely altered the way that organizations tend to use or look at different types of learning modalities and technologies. And honestly, there really didn't seem to be a huge impact on gamification. I think it's important to remember, this idea that we're talking about, the use of games, and we'll get into more of the mechanics of what we mean by games and gamification, but the use of these items and elements for learning, it's a very specific use case, right? It's not something that you're going to apply to literally everything that you do. Not everything can be a game, and it shouldn't. And so it represents a relatively small portion of the overall learning experience. But we do see that even though the majority of organizations figure they're going to do whatever they've been doing, if slightly more decide that they're going to do more use of gaming, since the pandemic has set in. And then just to sort of reiterate that point a little bit is that we ask, how frequently do you use the following modalities in your learning experiences, the programs that you deliver? And on a 4 or 5 point scale, a 1 to 5 point scale, these are the organizations that gave these elements a 4 or a 5, meaning they use them regularly or consistently. And you can see about 12% of organizations say that they use games to that degree, which is, like I said, pretty expected. It's not the same as everything being e-learning modules. So, but a big part of what we're going to talk about today, and Isobel, I'll have you come in and just say hi to folks here in a second. I think that's one of the things we're going to talk about is we need to get into a little bit of the difference between games, right, themselves, the actual playable game, and the elements of gamification applied to other elements of learning. But looking at some of this data and where companies, where their heads are with games and gamification, is that reflective of what you see with prospects and clients that you work with? How does that line up?
So I would have to say that a lot more prospects are asking for gamification elements when they're switching between LMSs now. That's definitely become a lot more of a focus for them when they're picking. I don't know if they're necessarily always ready to jump straight into it. A lot more, it would be nice, and it's on our roadmap, but it's not something we're doing yet. And mostly that's just because I think a lot of clients aren't really sure how to do it within an LMS. They're not sure what their options are, and they're not sure how to implement or extend this one game module they may have into the rest of the learning that they're doing. So a lot of the projects that we're doing now with onboarding is really helping people extend what they're doing in their activities so that they can implement it within their LMS in a more immersive manner.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what we're trying to hope, today, is to help people think through this. If this is something that you're interested in, obviously, you've tuned in today because you've got an interest in these ideas. We want to sort of help clear some of the air and talk through how this works and how you might implement it. Because I do believe that's something that holds organizations back from this, is they're not sure how to use games or gamification and whether or not it's worth it, what's the value, and how do we do it right. So, and because of that, we don't see very often, it's way down at the bottom here, but that's literally, we ask companies, what tools are you using to deliver learning? And few companies are using a dedicated gaming platform for learning. And that, is understandable as well, because as you'll see, as we talk through this, these ideas that we're talking about are probably more at home within the context of other larger modalities, other tools, other platforms like the LMS or the LXP or something like that. But, you get a sense that we're still in the nascent days of games and gamification, but 57% of companies said they found that games are either anywhere from moderately to extremely effective for learning. And, Isobel and I today will hopefully talk through some of the reasons why they are effective and how to make them effective. And then sort of wrapping up where things are going, we do see that companies plan to invest in games and gamification moving forward. We see 25% of companies that are looking to add investment in gaming, 33% looking to add investment in badging, which is an element of gamification, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. But just looking back at all the research that we've done recently, and just seeing that despite how often I end up talking one-on-one with companies that are doing this and having a lot of success, and we get a lot of, in our awards program, we get a lot of submissions where organizations are doing these really cool things with games that are really driving engagement and helping people retain learning and apply it later. So that we see the potential there. And then I look at the overall data and I see that it's still a very slow move to using this more often. So hopefully we can help companies today make their way through that. So as we think through it, I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, I like to take almost a step back and say, okay, we hear a lot the words game, we hear gamification, we hear them used interchangeably quite a bit, which isn't that big of an issue, but it is important to understand what you're talking about when you're discussing this with learners, with business leaders, people who you're trying to convince to make investment decisions. So I look at it like this: that there are games, which are the actual games that somebody would play. Right. So the employees would engage in an activity. They would launch some sort of game, whether it literally is arcade based, or if it's more like a word game or matching, but there is gameplay involved in the actual activity, some sort of point and click interface. Perhaps you've got an avatar or a character that you have to get through a challenge, or you're just answering a series of questions, what have you. But this being that the learning event itself is a game. Then there is the idea of gamification, where you're taking the things that people should probably already be doing from a learning perspective, right? You want people to be accessing this content. You want them to be answering questions about what they've learned correctly. You want them to be able to demonstrate a skill, right? These are the things that we're trying to do from learning anyway. You can apply game mechanics to that, where you're giving points, awards, achievements, leveling people up based on the way that they're progressing through their learning, the different things that they're achieving in that. And you're able to add this element of gamification, which provides a bit of a motivator, a bit of engagement, a sense of reward. And these things can, as you define them separately, but they can work well together in the same environment as well. But again, Isobel, is this something that you see when you start to talk about games with organizations? Do you feel that this is still one of the big challenges, is the difference between these two elements?
I do. I see a lot of people almost overthinking in a way what it is that they were doing before, thinking they need to go in a different direction. And really, it's just a matter of rethinking what their original objective was and how they're doing it within their courses, but also figuring out what the overall gamification plan is, right? Because there should be an objective beyond. And yes, if you're already designing good courses, you're already looking for these outcomes, you're already trying to achieve this anyway, so you're probably not too far off. But from a gamification perspective, yeah, it's really extending what you should really be extending what you're already doing.
Right. And so stepping through now, I think one of the things to keep in mind is this is not something completely unheard of, right? This is the kind of thing that's occurring for most people in their everyday lives, or encountering some form of gamification, whether they realize it or not. It could be even the idea of, acquiring points at Starbucks, or, by purchasing. Obviously the motive for Starbucks is to get you to spend more and to get more marketing information on you and your buying trends, but they're rewarding you with points that you can save up and use towards something. So they're rewarding the activity that they're trying to motivate, right? You see it in almost any kind of app that you may use. There's a gamification element to a lot of the things that we do on a daily basis. So it's not as though you're introducing some sort of foreign concept into learning. You're just trying to add this layer that motivates people to do the things that you need them to do within this environment, and then reward them for that too, as well, if possible. So we start to think about this, the gaming that goes on, and including literal games. I mean, I always look at modern video games. When people start to think of, well, you can't do games and learning, it's frivolous and it's sort of a waste of time, and we don't want to, people are too busy as it is. We don't need little corny games to try to engage people. But the truth is, if you look at, say, modern video games, they are the embodiment of a really engaging learning experience. Like typically, a lot of them, they are online. So you're working in a group, right? So you've got people working as a team to try to achieve an objective. And as they make their way through the objective, they have successes, and then they maybe have failures and have to go back up and start again from a certain point, learn and work ahead based on what they learned from that failure. Very much a learning experience. And, we can sort of build on that within a learning experience. And so you look at the different types of game players there are, and this is, obviously very general, but there are different types of games that are built to tap into these motivators in these different types of game players, right? So you've got your achievers. These are people that are obsessive about collecting points, about leveling up, gaining those achievements, getting those badges, getting those ribbons, getting the awards, what have you. But then you've got people who are explorers who their thrill is being able to discover new things within the environment, if it's a game, and they want to do it their way and find things. You look at, again, looking at like a modern video game, an achiever can do this. Most of these games will have these bonus points that for doing certain things that will add up, and you can trade those in for, whether it's a power up or some a new skin on your character, what have you. Or you can explore in the game and forget about the direct goal that you have. You can actually go out and look around and do other things. Then you've actually got socializers, and games now obviously have a huge social element. So a lot of these games, again, like I said, are online. You're working in teams, people can communicate with each other. Some people really thrive on that aspect of the game. And then there are the fighters, the competitors, the people who are in the game to play. They love the competition. They like the leaderboards, like to see themselves on that leaderboard and moving up, if not already at the top. Isabel, I was going to just say, we talked about this earlier. You had some thoughts, and some of these kind of struck you from a learning perspective, though. What are your thoughts on being able to tap into these kinds of game player types from a learning perspective?
There's so many opportunities. It's so much fun. So I would say in my experience, with some clients, there's usually an emphasis on one over the other a little bit more. Like we have one client where their audience is incredibly competitive. So tapping into that fighters group it's so easy. It's like low hanging fruit. The socializers, I find sometimes it's harder to tap into, sometimes where you have an organization that doesn't want to have more online interaction. And I get nervous about having more of the social elements. So sometimes that's a harder group to work with.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, there's definitely so many ways to tap into these groups, even if you don't have forums. But yeah, there are so many ways to tap into it, and we can get into that a little bit more later on. But there's elements that you can use for all of these, and they're pretty simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think we'll touch on some of these elements. And Tan may ask a question here, just sort of level setting again, saying that gamification. This is what Tan may is saying, is gamification can be considered a subset of games because it's not necessary that games might be related to the content. She's wondering if that's the case. And I would say, to a degree, that's probably true, because technically you could have a game that's not necessarily related to the content. Although I think that kind of misses the point. It's how games have been used in the past as sort of an engagement tool. Like, hey, this is fun, this is interesting, do this. I think that approach has a limited return. Because if you're going to spend the time and energy trying to engage your learners via a game, the game itself should be related to the content and actually be, helping the learners either tap into their knowledge of the topic or exhibit the skill that they need to exhibit to get through the game, to actually participate in the game. So I think really not necessarily a subset. I think game is something, when you just use the word game, I think of actually playing, right? Whether it's a drag and drop, a word match, a literal video game where you've got a character who's jumping or running or what have you. And then gamification is more about what goes into something that already exists to add game mechanics like leveling and narrative structure. And actually, we'll talk a little bit here, some of the gamification elements. So these are the things that arise within gamification that need to be sort of fleshed out from a learning perspective, right? So the first thing is this idea of progress mechanics. So the fact that learners need to know that they are making progress. Everybody wants to know that the work that they're putting in, the effort that they're giving is resulting in something. So being able to display what the progress mechanics are, like showing that you've done this, you've gotten to this point, you've gotten this many points, you've gotten this badge, some sort of achievement level for folks. That's one element. Then this idea of a narrative, right? This thread that connects everything, that isn't, so the points and the badges don't just exist for no reason, that you can actually build a narrative that says, ties them all together, that tells some sort of a story of, here's why you want to move from point A to point B, or eventually point Z. Then there's this idea of player control. And this will vary obviously from environment to environment, but an indication that the learner is actually has some control over what they're doing, where they're going, what's happening. This is important from a learning perspective. We've seen in our research how impactful it is for learners to be have at least some sort of autonomy over their learning, as well as the ability to see their progress. So putting that in is definitely a key gamification element. We also see how important feedback is in the learning environment. People really want to know how from their peers. They want to know from their coaches, mentors, managers, how they're doing, what's working. And so within the context of the learning, being able to know if they're doing the right thing or not, right? If we're getting things wrong, it's important to know that that's happening, and then why and how to remedy that. So game mechanics offer a lot of opportunity for that sort of immediate feedback of how to retry and get better, or seek out new information, to correct any mistakes. Of course, we talked a little bit about the social piece. So those opportunities for collaborative problem solving. Organizations know that so much of the work that they do is done via teams. They know, so why shouldn't we be learning in that kind of environment, having people collaborate during a learning experience so that they're building those kinds of skills at the same time. And then along the same lines of those mechanics and the progression is that scaffolded learning, so that increasing the challenge. Obviously, if you've ever played a video game, as you go through each level, they each get a little bit more difficult because you're getting better at it, you're learning more. And so the idea of scaffolding the learning, so you're easing people up and building towards something, that mastery and that leveling up. And again, the social connection, so people can share how they're doing, and they can also share tips and tricks, right? Best practices. Here's what helped me. Here's how I learned. These are all elements that you find in games that are super helpful for engaging learners, helping them retain, helping them move ahead, helping them progress. So yeah, and Isobel, some of the thoughts you have when you work with companies around games, what are some of the key elements, either from this list or others, that you focus on?
I would say most of what we focus on is this, combined with making sure that people complete. So it's whatever method we can get to help people get to not just complete, but also retain the knowledge. So we use, in different contexts, we use pretty much all of these, and then some, wherever we can fill in the gaps to help encourage people to come back and learn everything they need to learn and more.
Got it. So then, we wanted to talk about some of the elements in a little more detail, and there are several different ones, but I think one of the most common ones that people experience first when they start to think about games, and maybe it hasn't even really thought about it from a gaming perspective, but the idea of points, right? And it seems very simple, but it's a great way to start, and it actually has a lot of value. Maybe Isobel, just take us through some of the ideas around points and how they work and what they mean for gamification.
Certainly. So different systems that you're using will have different options, but the approach that we prefer to recommend is one where you take a look at what your objectives are, your learning objectives are, and hierarchically sort of categorize what the results are that you're looking for, whether you're looking to build specific skills or make sure that people retain certain knowledge, or if you're building certain traits in your audience. So if you're trying to build leaders, then you're looking more for sort of leadership traits, right? And if you're looking to teach a specific job role and or a specific skill, so try to separate those out and categorize them. And then when you're completing activities or such, look at the activity and see how would that translate back. If someone were to complete that activity, how would that translate back to each of those types of points? So we do spend a lot of time at the beginning of our onboarding process sort of analyzing and looking at the content that we have, the objectives, identifying where new content may need to be created even, and analyzing them and rewarding the completions with specific point values that make sense for that subject. So say they're completing a course on how to use a phone system, right, as a really basic one there. Then what the points are is really specific to that skill. So you don't want to give a general, you've got 5 learning points for completing this thing. It might be 0.5 learning points for taking this one part of this one bigger picture thing, but it's 0.5 points of customer service, right? So So really taking a look at the points and analyzing them and breaking them down based on what the sort of traits are is a much better use of points instead of just an overall general point system. Because then it also gives you more analytics options to determine, well, you know what, this person, these two people have 500 points each. Great, that's fantastic. But this one is really strong in their leadership points, and this one's really strong in this skill, but they may not be the same thing. So how you communicate and how you target those different learners will be different based on the sort of points breakdown that they have. So definitely, I recommend that. And also, points are something you can give in small doses. So whether it's a small micro learning activity, they may get a smaller number of points, but they'll get the points right away. So ideally, wherever you can, I do recommend trying to break down the activities you have so that you can give the points in smaller increments, and so they can see them increase faster, if you see what I mean. And then we earlier on in that survey that you were talking about, you mentioned that a lot of people are using LMSs and very few people are using gaming systems. Sometimes you can reuse, if an LMS supports credits, you can reuse credits as a way to break down your points system. You just may not be giving specific credits with a regulatory agency. It might just be that, you know, this is what I'm calling my credits and this is the credit system that I'm using. So it's a good way to potentially reuse something that's already in your LMS without having to go somewhere else for it.
Yeah, and that's sort of the best thing is, you know, depending on what your environment is, points are whatever you want them to be. It's the idea of what is it that your audience may be interested in, and different. It might not be the whole organization. Different audiences within the organization may respond to different incentives. So, you know, being able to create a system that rewards relevant outcomes for people, so that there's alignment. Because the idea, you know, one of the tricky things about gamification, it's when people and to reuse a word, is game the system, right? If you want to be sure that the ultimate outcome isn't just the points, right? Like the goal of the learning isn't simply to gather points. The goal has to be whatever the ultimate outcome of that training program is, you know. So for that phone system training, it's not just to accumulate the points, it's to be able to use that system effectively. And so just being sure that we're motivating and rewarding the right behaviors, so people aren't just focused solely on the points. The next thing that is probably the second most common thing people come across from a gaming standpoint is the idea of badges. And there are a lot of different systems out there that are badging systems, whether they're closed loop badging systems that work internally, or open badging systems where people can, you know, win badges and take them with them if they move to different organizations or different areas. But the idea of something that represents the achievement. So talk a little bit more about this.
Certainly. So badges are a great resource, mostly because they add a sort of a visual texture to instead of just a standard point system. So from a learner perspective, they all remember going to Girl Guides or Scouts or something like that when they're younger, and they understand what a badge is, which really helps initially. We highly recommend using an open system. Like we have SCORM for our courses. Open Badge is a great open system for documenting your badges and awarding them. Mostly because they can be shared easily, which I mentioned a little bit later on, but they can be shared easily, but they're also everything that about what they did to get there is baked right into the badge itself. So there's a record of it. You can move from one system to another and everybody knows what it is. So I highly recommend using the Open Badge system wherever you can. And I think there are beyond whatever, if your LMS doesn't support that, there are probably other systems out there that do Open Badge support as well. I do like the fact that with badges, you're really achieving something. So I personally, when I'm using badges, I use them to help motivate someone to complete. Like, and once you complete this thing, you will be awarded a badge. And I like to ideally theme them. So whatever narrative you're using within the course, extend that out to the badge as well. So if it's a Harry Potter themed course, then it'll be a Harry Potter themed badge. So things like that. Also, badges can expire, and it doesn't come up very often in gamification, but sometimes when you're learning a skill or something, that the length of the knowledge, like how long that knowledge is good for, especially comes up a lot more for us in tech, where just because you knew something about computers today doesn't mean 2 years from now that knowledge is still going to be applicable. So the other good thing about badges is that they can expire, meaning you've awarded this badge, you've been given it for this year, but next year you should probably retake this thing because you're going to need to maintain that badge. So all of those things I find really valuable. And again, sharing. If your program is not just about trying to get people to complete some training that they need if they're employees or something, but maybe you're selling training, badges can also be sort of a double benefit in that they can help you market your program as well. So as soon as someone's shared it to LinkedIn, then people see, oh, that's a badge for doing something. I should, it looks interesting. Maybe I should go follow that back through and see what it was for. So I do really recommend that. And then I'm not sure what other systems are supporting with regards to how they award badges, but they don't just have to be for completing an activity. So we've extended our system so that you can reward people for doing certain actions that go beyond it, whether it's posting in discussion forums or it's achieving a certain number of points in a certain area. So say you were looking at those leadership people and you wanted to make sure that someone's well-rounded and they've received, 5 points in this area, 5 points in that area, and so on and so forth. You could give badges for that as well. So really just defining what your check-in points are for each of the different objectives you have for your overall gamification program, and using the badges to as different indicators that someone's reached those check-in points.
So the next element then, with badges and points, typically end up pointing toward this idea of a leaderboard. So showing people, what the points they've got and where they rank and how that goes. And so using this as a motivator sometimes. So let's dig into a little bit of this. And if anybody has used any of these or has any experience with some of these, either not even as a learning professional, but like maybe you've been a part of something that uses points leaderboards, feel free to share your experiences in the chat.
So we've used leaderboards quite a few times. Again, with our more competitive audience, they're kind of a must. My preference isn't always to show just where the learner level is at, but really also to show where a team's level is at. So for me, when I'm looking at using a leaderboard, it's not just how this one person is doing with all of their points that will reach the super high competitive ones. But if you want to try to bring in, I mentioned earlier, it's sometimes harder to bring in the more social people. Building a team and building that camaraderie of like, our team is going to do better than your team. So say you've got you're teaching salespeople, you've got East Coast versus West Coast kind of thing. You building that competitiveness between those two groups is easier because then there's more camaraderie with the people within those groups to help anyone who may be struggling, or helping you encourage those people who are struggling to fill in the gaps and build the points overall. So for me, when I'm using leaderboards, it is a great way to reach that really highly competitive audience, but try to incorporate teams wherever you can. And then I don't ever just show the top of a leaderboard, because yes, showing the top is this person at the top, but if you've got a really large audience, you're never going to see all the people at the top. Sort of like if you're doing the Peloton, I would never be at the top of a Peloton group, but they show me where I'm at within the Peloton group. So I find that sort of mechanic from a leaderboard perspective very helpful. And also, whenever you're showing them, it's super easy to just include a little message below saying, some tips on how to improve your ranking. And I do find that helpful. It gives instant sort of instructions or help or tips to guide people in how to improve where they're at within the board. And I think you'll find not just the competitive people, but someone else might be interested to find out what are they missing? How come these other people are all the way up at 500 points and I'm at 50 kind of thing. So I do find that helpful too.
Yeah, that's one of the things we do hear back from organizations is it can be tricky. Make sure you understand your audience. And you mentioned your sales team, right? So there's a group that's typically motivated, and this idea of leaderboards creates that healthy competition. But there is that danger of demotivation. Now, if somebody doesn't get in the top section of the leaderboard, they may feel like, well, I'm never going to make the top of the leaderboard, so I don't care anymore, and I'm not going to bother. So it's a question of making sure that you've got the audience right, or using the leaderboard in conjunction with something else, right? So it's not solely about where you appear in the leaderboard. So it's again, it's one of all these elements serve a specific purpose, and they're not the right call in every situation, but they can be very useful in specific circumstances for sure.
And I would say if your system doesn't support leaderboards, if you're getting reports and results from the system on how people are doing within certain activities, there's no reason why you couldn't send out a weekly notice on those as well. That could also help motivate people, but it gives you a chance to craft, like, and this group is doing this, maybe you need to do this to help boost whatever. It gives you a chance to add some more feedback as well. But yeah, it doesn't always have to be an automated leaderboard if that's difficult for your group.
So you also wanted to bring in the tie this to certificates, which I think this is a great element. I just have this anecdotal story of an organization that presented at one of our conferences, and they presented their learning program, and they had won an award for this program that they put together. And one of the outcomes, they had said, well, we had high 80% completion rates. It was a relatively challenging program, but they had high 80s, 87, 80% completion rate. And they were trying to think, well, how do we get that a little higher? And they said, literally, they allowed the learners to print out a certificate that said they had finished, and they saw completion rates go up into the low 90s%. Just that one act alone was enough to motivate just enough people to say, you know what, I want to finish this. I want to get that. And I just thought that was an interesting example of, what this can play. But talk a little bit more about certificates.
Certainly. So there are different levels of what I would say is a certificate. There's the official certificate, you finish this program, and it's not just a certificate of completion. It's the official, got the signature, got the seal, got the credits and such that you've awarded. There's that level. Then there's a certificate of completion. And I think anytime you're using a certificate of completion, there's room to move. There's room to add some more interesting and fun, motivating elements to it. So it could be anything from even just down to the level of the text that you use within it, and bringing in the narrative, whatever game it was. So yeah, so if you're going with a Harry Potter theme, why not a Harry Potter looking certificate of completion? Not a difficult thing to do. But also, there's no reason why that certificate has to be one page. That certificate could be multiple pages, where the first one is your certificate of completion, and the next one is tips for, what to do next. And the next part is maybe a coupon for a free coffee or something. So depending on what it is you wanted to include, think of your certificate as like this empty document that you can fill at the end of someone getting a course that does anything you need it to do. It can tell them motivating things. It could be, not just you've completed this thing, but it could be an additional chance to communicate with the learner to help motivate them in other ways. Yeah.
Another thing that comes up, and a lot of this has to do with, when you're giving points and badges and certificates, the idea that you're recognizing and you're rewarding learning. And we saw in our research, we did a study on upskilling and reskilling, and it was focused on the personalization of learning. And we tried to find elements that, we looked at two groups of people in the study. We had organizations that said that their learning was preparing them for the future of work, versus companies that said, well, what we're doing right now isn't really preparing us very well. So you've got these two distinct groups. And then we tried to see what they were doing differently from one another. And one of the standouts was these organizations that said our learning approach is has positioned us well. They were much more likely to say that they provided some sort of reward and or recognition for learning. That they were, if you finish this program, whatever it was, they were offering some sort of reward, some sort of recognition. And so it was interesting to see that was one of the key standout elements. But talk a little bit more about the ideas behind, rewards and recognition for learning.
So we ask a lot of our learners. Sometimes we're putting them in front of a computer and we're making them take these courses, and they're essential things that they have to do while they start their job, or essential things they have to do every year to come back and do their job. So really, if someone excels, or even just they take the time to actually do the training, giving them a chance to be rewarded or recognized for doing that, or doing that exceptionally well, is, I think, something that needs to be baked into every single gamification program wherever possible. And it can be as manual or as automated as you need it to be. So, I mean, I think the golden egg for me is if you can have an integration with some sort of reward system, I think that would be fantastic. Not everyone has that, obviously, but there are systems out there that you can connect to that automatically give them options to pick amongst, maybe a gym membership or Amazon Prime or something like that. So there are definitely options around that. But I would say that if you're looking for rewards and recognition, even just sending announcements out saying, once you say you're doing an annual certification, and you can say, just wanted to call out, these 10 people were the first to finish. Thanks for finishing so quickly. Or these few people got the highest scores. Those are also fantastic. So I do highly recommend that from that perspective, to keep with the to keep presenting that information in any way you can. And I mentioned it a little bit on the previous slide about certificates, adding a second page to give a rewards. I mean, it can be as basic as the first 5 people get, the best parking spots in your office, or it could be that, the first 5 people to complete get a free coffee or something. Anything like that, in which case they're anxious to get to their certificate to see if they got it, any of those things that you can do, I think are fantastic. And also a simple one that almost every LMS will have is a completion notification. So there's absolutely no reason why you can't send that completion notification to them and their boss saying, hey, this person actually completed this course, which is great, and they did it quickly, or they did it within X number of days. Anytime you have an automated notification like that, I would definitely use it whenever possible.
Okay, and just checking to make sure that we have Dave back.
Yep.
Is it okay? Awesome.
So if you want to keep sharing, I'll go right ahead. But so looking at the next step beyond the rewards and recognition, we wanted to talk a little bit about showing progress, right? And we've already touched on this a few times in different ways, but I think what's important is that it really is key that people want to know that they are making progress. And a lot of this, even you go back to the rewards and recognition, the points, the badges, everything. It's something that comes up a lot in the bigger picture around learning that I've been talking about a lot lately, is that people just want the what's in it for me. It's a very important element of the learning experience. And if we want to build engagement and have people engaged in the learning and be able to retain it, they simply just want to know what's in it for me. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, right? It's about, look, I'm going to give you my time and energy. Why? Make sure that I know why it's important, what's going to come of it, and then show me that I'm making progress, right? Is a big key, is one of the key elements of that, what's in it for me. And, we found that almost all organizations in our research said that learners require more frequent feedback in their learning progression. So they want to know how they're doing and where they're going, and you can build that in via gamification. So Isobel, talk a little more about that too.
Certainly. So I'm a big proponent in showing progress in many different ways, but really targeting what the goal is as well. So any e-learning course, though unfortunately a lot of authoring tools don't support it, but there is, not to get too technical, CMI progress measure, which a course should send to the LMS that tells us exactly the percentage complete of that course. I wish they all did, but they don't. So that would be fantastic if more of them can do that. But beyond that, wherever you can, showing the progress of how they're doing with either within that one activity or within a group of activities, or even within the overall program is great. We have one client where they have volunteers that come in, and as the progression of all the things they have to do, there's a standard set of things they have to do. So on every single page, wherever they are in that learner view, they can see in essence a progress bar of how they are until they're approved volunteers for their organization. So visualizing like the larger goals and not just the small moments as well. Both are important, but ideally when you're looking at the bigger picture, sometimes it's harder to see that and harder to visualize that. So anywhere you can, if you can show that larger progression, like maybe someone's a new employee and it's going to take 3 weeks for them to be, ready to hit the ground running. Sometimes you just need to show, this is the 3 weeks, you're on week 2 of 3, so that sort of thing is really helpful. Also, it doesn't mean those progress bars have to be boring. Whenever possible, I highly recommend bringing that theme back in. So whatever your narrative is for your games, whatever your overall goal is, there's no reason why your donut chart doesn't have to be an interesting donut chart, or your progress bar doesn't have to be a boring old progress bar. It depends on really bringing the theme of what your game or your gamification program is and bringing that back into the way that you're presenting those options as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, if anytime you can get that to when they get to 100%, doing something like animating it. Like we had a client who wanted to make their progress bar look like a wand, and when you got to 100% complete, the wand would wave and something would happen on the page. I think that's great. So anywhere you can do things like that, I do it. Whenever possible, do it.
Yep. Melody, who's on the call today, says that even for a single e-learning, they had a progress bar in that. But then for a course that had a bunch of different elements, it's nice to have that update in the LMS. So as you're picking off these various elements of an overall program, you get to see sort of where you are. So yes, I appreciate you sharing that, Melody. And my one piece of advice on the progress bar, and maybe everyone else can, or a lot of people can agree with me on this, if you've ever seen sort of software progress bars for downloading or installation, make sure that it's accurate and doesn't get up to 99% and then take just as long to get that last 1%, because that gets back into the demotivation category. But most of the tools that are built into these platforms are quite accurate from this progress standpoint.
And if you can, pick an authoring tool that supports my progress measure wherever possible.
Yeah, and one of the question that came in actually, and I was saving it for sort of the Q&A because I think it's a bigger picture question, so I think I will still save it's coming in, but it was asking about some of the tools for creating some of these things. So we will get to that question in the Q&A, I promise. Another thing that you can do from an achievement standpoint is unlocking things, and I think that's like another way of describing sort of this motivation for people. So what are some of the things you can provide from an unlocking perspective?
So the easiest when you're working with an LMS is prerequisites. Sometimes you really do have a prerequisite where you need them to finish the first thing in order to move on to the next. That doesn't mean you can't entice them with whatever that next thing is, or encourage them to, there's a secret thing that you get to do next, but you don't know what it is yet. So prerequisites are great. A great feature to use when trying to implement an unlocking strategy, especially if you're using a bigger picture thing where you have to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and so on and so forth. So prerequisites is a great way to do that. It also is a way to communicate what you have to do in order to unlock this thing as well. So typically an LMS where there's a prerequisite will tell you what they have to do first. So as long as you can present that in a slightly funner way, then, in order to learn this system, you have to learn this other system first, can be presented in a much more fun way. But prerequisites is a great way to manage unlocking. Auto enrollment as well. So when you determine that someone is at a certain level, there's no reason why you can't, when you're doing your enrollments into activities, say you have now reached a junior leader role. Therefore, we've enrolled you into these 3 activities as a new junior leader. We've now unlocked these activities for you. So definitely auto enrollment is a great way to handle that. And different systems have different options for their enrollment. So it would really depend on what system you're using, but it's a great way to manage unlocking. Also, coupons or passwords. We use coupons sometimes to give free access to an activity. There's no reason why that can't be used as an unlocking mechanism as well, and considered more of a password in a way than a coupon. So it's a great way to say, this is an activity, and once you completed this thing, we're going to give you a password to go to unlock it for you as well. And yeah, anytime you're using an unlocking mechanic, any system at all, whichever one you're using, just make sure that you always tell people what they need to do in order to unlock it, because it's one thing to dangle this thing in front of them. It's another thing to not tell them what they need to do in order to unlock it.
Yeah. right, then it becomes a game in and of itself, which is a separate activity. So, oh, Trisha wanted to share something on unlocking. So I'm going to share this with the group if you haven't seen it in the chat, folks. But just mentioning that Trisha says that they used unlocking feature when they wanted to create a specific learning path. So each of the modules was locked, and then they unlocked as, you know, like you said, the previous one was completed. And she was actually surprised at how much of a motivator that would be when they would get in there and they would see sort of the grayed out module titles, right? You can't touch this yet because they're there and they can see them. And then it was a real motivator to get people to move ahead and unlock so they could get in and see each one of them become, you know, active and no longer grayed out. So yeah, a great example. I appreciate that, Trisha. Thank you. Okay, so we got a couple more here. This is interesting too. I think, you know, as a gamification element is notifications. We've seen, you know, for a long time now, the idea of push notifications as a tool for learning, like, and how effective they can be. Just a quick little, hey, you've got this new thing to check out, and you know, this is rolling out, or you're coming up on time to be due for this. But these push notifications work really well, but you can also incorporate them into gamification as well. So let's see what some of these are.
So we have a lot of organizations that use notifications as a way to help encourage completion, just right off the bat, no matter what. It's sort of a necessary evil in a way. If you're working on a compliance program, you have to get to 100% complete. A really good use of notifications and how you manage the recipients and the frequency and such is sort of a necessary step in reaching that 100% compliance. If you're using gamification, and if you have any sense of humor at all, please use notifications in a slightly more creative way, depending on how you're managing the enrollment notification, or how you're managing it with, like we just discussed right now about unlocking, like, hey, you've reached a certain level, like, or you're at a job level of this, where we've decided to unlock this new activity for you, is much more fun than getting a notification saying you now have to do this activity. So really think about how you're wording your notifications, whether it is a push notification or an email notification, or even a text message version of a notification. No matter what the tool you're using, just try to make sure that the message is concise and in a more positive, sort of encouraging way. I also really do like to use notifications on the larger program. So yes, if you were using Learning Pass, I like to include notifications on the Learning Pass to help say, you know, it's week 2 and you should be at this point in week 2. If you're having trouble, let us know. If you're not, you're already ahead, good on you. You know, whatever those messages are, try to keep them at the learning path level as well, just to help keep people motivated to continue to complete, and remind them what they're going to get at the end once they have completed. I also do find that, especially when you're getting toward the end of the cycle, so if you think that it's going to take 30 days to complete a learning path or an activity, and there are some people who seem to be struggling, and some of the later notifications putting in hints, you know, you seem to be having trouble, you've had this activity for a while and you haven't got past this point. Maybe what we should do is give you a hint, you know, and this hint is this, and maybe it's a teaser to something that they need to do in order to unlock or something. But ideally, try to embellish those reminders with anything that you think will help them move on and unblock them as well. And also competition. There's no reason why you can't put in some of these reminder notifications, you know, just to remind you, you need to finish this thing because the other team have 90% completion. You guys are at 80% completion. So bringing the competitive element into the notifications are fantastic. And I can't say it enough. Anytime you're working with gamification, theme it. So whatever your overall theme is from one activity to another, try to include that narrative into your notifications as well.
And a good question from Gwen, ideas for reaching learners that don't have email addresses, so notifications might not work. And so my first take on that is, and again, this is also depends on your audience, but if they're have mobile device access, can push notifications to their mobile device, and that's either literally to their phone number, or if it's through an app, if there's a learning platform that you're using that has a mobile app, that should be able to push out notifications as well. Any app that's, you know, on your phone has the capability to push out notifications. And so being able to do that from this standpoint, you know, from a gaming platform, whether it's an LMS, whatever, an LXP, whatever you're using, tapping into that notification tool to push those out. So if you have workers who are deskless and maybe don't have email addresses, perhaps they have access to their own mobile device or a company mobile device that they can get notifications on. I'm not sure how else you might do it without those two things. If it's no mobile device and no email address, but there are probably other ways. And what are your thoughts?
I've done a few projects where the email address was an issue, whether the organization didn't have their email address, but they had a phone number, or in regions where it's just people don't have data on their phone. So they'll receive text messages instead. So, I mean, we've done projects that deliver training in India. And what we noticed with there was that the SMS was way higher. The results and sending the through that method was much higher option. So ended up switching that whole program so that by default, all of those notifications went out by text message, which is another great way to deliver that content.
Great, thank you. And last couple here, learning paths. There's obviously most people on the call are going to be familiar with the idea of learning paths, but the fact is you can use the concept of a learning path to bake in some gamification. So talk about how those two things go hand in hand.
Certainly. So I personally love learning paths because it's a way to bring the game into the LMS. So all of the work to build these games doesn't have to be in one giant module of e-learning. It can be broken up into smaller pieces and reused from one learning path to another. I know that a lot of authoring tools, it's all just one giant SCO. It's like bringing back the original plan where you could have reusable objects and use them in different training, whether it's in a junior level learning path that might reuse the same and then add on to it in a more advanced learning path. So I personally love the use of learning paths for many, many reasons, and that being one of them. I also like that it's a great way to help visualize the progression through that bigger goal. So if your goal is everything you need to know to be an employee at an organization, then that is your learning path, right? So it means that when they come in and when they finish, they can see everything they have to do. And it's a great way to visualize that for them. So for me, yes, it dictates the larger goal. It shows them the progression. And it gives you a chance to extend that theme again outside of each of those modules or the courses that you have inside the learning path, whether it is a course or maybe it's an outside activity or an ILT or something like that. It gives you a chance to bring that in into the LMS through the learning path and give you much more granular reporting on it. It also means that you can give different hints at different points. So depending on how you're grouping your activities within the learning path. So you may have, week 1, week 2, week 3, or it might be beginner, intermediate, and advanced sections within your learning path. Depending on how you're breaking it up, it gives you a chance to add hints and given different points to reward them on items as well. So yeah, we have clients that do either badging on the smaller activities or badging on the overall learning paths. Again, it gives you those sorts of flexible options.
Yeah, this is a great way to sort of bring everything all together, all the things that we sort of talked about, and stitch it together. And that theme, we saw earlier in the game mechanics, the idea of a narrative is really powerful in these environments. Then you've got this, adding a scavenger hunt, which I think most people are familiar with what that is, but within a learning program, what are your takeaways here?
So we talked about the type of learner that looks to discover and explore, and I can tell you that we're using this option with our own LMS, with our own training, even because for us the objective is to get people to learn as much about our system as possible when they become our customers. So we have a scavenger hunt set up so that as you work your way through the different courses on how to use our LMS, you get tips and hints on where the next clue could be found. And that's somewhere within this self-discoverable collection of activities. So really, once you figured out what all your key activities, so if you have 100 activities and you know that, to be an LMS administrator, there's 5 that you really want them to take, or 10 you want them to really take. You identify which ones those are, and then you build the order with which you want them to do them. And then you're figuring out what the clues are and such. It is so easy to do because all you're doing is at the end of the activity, thank you for completing this. This is the hint. This is your clue for the next activity. And it could be either right at the end of the activity, or it could be in the completion notification for the activity, however you want to do it. But it's a great way to help sort of add a level of self-discovery in a more interesting way than just going to a page and skimming through all the list of activities, just kind of boring way to do it. So it helps encourage people to, go find the answer to the clue. It engages them with the content in another way. And it helps them explore through content that they may not have found otherwise.
Yeah. And then the last piece is just overall, in general, the idea of the learner experience, which there's been a lot of thought around what makes the learner experience, but at least from this gaming experience, the idea of how do we bring this all into that experience.
And I think this is where all the pieces really do come together. And I want to make sure that when people are designing these programs, that they think about this. Everything that the learner does from the start of their journey all the way through to completing all of their training and knowing everything, ideally. Everything about that experience should follow the same narrative, should follow the same goals, follow this cohesive structure. So when you're looking at your learning experience, everything about the colors you use, the wording you use, the language, everything about it should be cohesive. So everything from using a theme to your marquees, so the image that you're using for your activities to advertise the activities or to indicate which activity is which, coming up with a theme for those images. That's super easy. The resources, making sure that you're attaching your resources that are in a themed way, making sure that that any features that you put on your homepage are really follow the same sort of theme. Progress bars. I can't see enough. Everything that you see on the screen is really just scratching the surface on the sorts of things that I think people can do with their learner experience to help make sure that they follow the same theme. I had one client that went with I've mentioned a couple of times, a Harry Potter theme, where they came in and they combined it all so that even just right on the homepage, you could see whether you were a muggle or a professor, from every level, depending on how you did on everything, and presented, because you're at this level, you should do this next, because you're at that level, you should do that next. And if you want to try the scavenger hunt, try it over here. Anything you can do to bring that straight into the learner experience and extend it throughout, like the look of the and the wording and everything that you do within it. And for fun, if you can change the footer content, add an Easter egg. Just why not?
Yeah.
Because that'll get around.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this is all so great. And you can see, I think, when you look at everything, you've seen how all of this stuff builds upon one another, right? This isn't like do all of these things right now. It's all of these elements feed into each other, and you can use them in multiple different ways. But the idea that, points can then translate into badges, which can then translate into leaderboards, which, then you can create scaffolding and then some unlocking and then a scavenger hunt that builds to the unlocking. You can, all these elements, again, are build upon one another. And it's just about creating the right experience for your audience, for the content that you're trying to deliver, right? Does it line up with the skill and the behavior that you're trying to get people to acquire? If there's alignment there, that's even better. So you can see the key takeaways here. It's in the deck for those of you who are going to download the deck, or you'll get a link to it after the webinar as well. Isobel, the question that came in, and if you want to open your Q&A on yours, because it went away for me when I lost the webinar earlier, but the question was around authoring tool. Yeah, so if you don't have a tool that has it built in, is that the question? Like, what do you do if you don't necessarily have one of those tools, or if you have a specific question in front of you, maybe you could.
Sure. So the question was, is there a course authoring software which offers options for interactions with gamification already built in? So right. In my opinion, any course authoring tool that supports SCORM 2004 should support interactions, which means that the potential is there for it to be able to do any kind of gamification you want. Mm-hmm. I know that there are simple ways to do it, and there are more complex ways to do it. I was at a great conference for gamification where someone had used Articulate, and they did a fantastic scenario-based game using that tool. So if you can do it in Articulate, you should be able to do it. Though Articulate doesn't support progress measure, but it does support interactions, which is great. So I do believe that Articulate will definitely do that. Some of the other ones, I would assume the same sort of thing. If there are interactions, you should be able to. There are add-ons to some of them that where people have really prepped that and made it a little easier to author with, that might be worth looking at. But I've seen some great examples out of the box tools that people have used. And don't forget, it doesn't have to be a full game tool. I mean, you could have you could have something simple like a tic-tac-toe or a Jeopardy style game that is a great way to deliver a quiz, anything like that you can bake into these courses would be great. But also, I mean, I've also at these conferences, I've seen people use an ILT to deliver an in-person card game that did phenomenally well. So yeah, there's a lot can be done. And if you're looking at gamification, then you've already got your creative hat on already, which is great. And it doesn't have to cost a fortune as long as you're thinking about what you're really trying to get out of the game.
Yeah, I think that example of the in-person, I think is great, because as companies get back into more in-person learning, because obviously it went away for a little bit, as we get back into that, really rethinking, well, how do we do it? Because now we're realizing we can do so much of this other stuff virtually, online, on demand, what have you. How do we really maximize the time that we've got when we have people together? And these games and simulations are a real great way to leverage that together time and really make the most of it. And so that's something to keep in mind when you're putting those together as well. I know we've gone a little over the hour. We've answered the questions. I did have a quick question though, I think, Isobel, that might be on people's minds. You can do this in almost any technology environment. One of the things I think about is how important is something like the idea of XAPI to this kind of environment. The idea that I've got this publishing standard that I can publish the game to, or the module to XAPI, so that I can track what happens inside the games.
Okay, you may have asked me exactly the wrong question.
Okay.
Just because, so I'm old school. I've been using SCORM for so long now that I've delved into the SCORM 2004 standard, and there's so much in there that people aren't using that's already there and is already standard. So honestly, instead of investing a ton of money on getting into a system that supports XAPI, your LMS is probably already supporting 2004. And if it does, then that's pretty much all you need. Don't invest the extra money in something else. I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, I've asked many people what is the scenario and what they want to use XAPI for. And when they start explaining it to me, I'm like, but you understand that SCORM 2004 already does interactions, already gives you tons of information about interactions, but in a codified way that the LMS and the course and your reporting will already be able to report on. It's just a matter of making sure that the courses are sending those interactions. So really, it's just, I would look at more how you're publishing your courses and what level of detail is being sent to the LMS, and in what format. But I think I'd start there and then see if SCORM isn't enough for you, if you really do need to go XAPI. I could talk for hours on that. So.
No, but that's great feedback. Because I think
more detail.
It's great feedback, because when people hear about some new thing that they want to inject into the learning experience, they think, okay, well, this isn't a test grade. It's not a completion. Do I now need some extra thing to track? And I think your feedback is really great, that 9 times out of 10, you probably don't. This is stuff you can do in the current environment. So I appreciate that feedback a lot. We did get a late question in. I'm sorry, I know it's well over, but we still have people on, so I want to make sure we talk to them. But Gwen was asking, do we find that games or gamification is challenging with a multi-generational population? Do older people get engaged by this form of content delivery? And my first interaction is yes, they do. I think we ascribe a little too much weight to generational differences. Clearly, they pop up in for certain things. I don't think this is one of those places, unless you get too clever or sophisticated with the way you're building your game, and you maybe are looking at maybe a newer game mechanic or something that's really pointed at a certain generation, like millennials or what have you, then you might be an issue. But the idea of achievement leveling, all these gamification, those are not generational. Those are focused on human intrinsic and sometimes extrinsic motivators. I don't know, but in practice, Isobel, since you were folks, do you see this come up at all as a generational issue?
I don't really see it come up, mostly because to solve one problem, you're kind of solving the other. Like I would say, You want to keep your interfaces as simple as possible because the younger generation will be annoyed by having all the other stuff in the way, and the older generation may just, that's too much. So generally, I always try to keep my interfaces and my experiences as simple as possible.
Mhm.
And take away, and if there's something that they don't need to see, remove it. If there's something that they don't need to know, remove it. And that generally solves the problem of both of what they're looking for anyway. So yeah, I haven't really experienced that per se.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that perspective. Thank you. And I hope everyone got some tidbits out of this. There was a lot of elements involved there. And again, it wasn't a list of things that you have to go out and complete all together all at once. It's just a whole bunch of different things you can think about, and they all work together very well. You can use them in different ways and create, different experiences by combining them and using them in different ways. So a lot of potential here. And not all of it requires some sort of new and complex technology investment. It's really just thinking about what you've got and how to utilize it, and then going from there. So Isobel, thanks so much for all of your insights and input. I really appreciate the work you did here and the time you spent with us. And of course, thanks to Thinking Cap for giving you to us and supporting the hour.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you on another webinar. Thank you.